So, what we're all trying to do is create wealth. Whether it's to pay off your home, go on holidays, buy cars, or look after your kids. But how do we create wealth? Well, typically we do that by going to work. We go to work, we've got a job, and then we make money. And from that money, we invest. Now, what do we invest in? Well, we invest in property, we invest in shares. Should we invest in cash, art, gold, or for the lucky few, maybe wine? The two most common are shares and property. But the big question, of course, is which one? Well, here's what the two asset classes have done over the last 10 years. And as you can see, the winner clearly is property. But if that's the case, why is so much more time spent researching the share market? There are PE ratios, volatility indices, alphas, betas, and even deltas. But if property is the best asset class, why isn't the Financial Review loaded with information on property? It's because property is not treated like other wealth creation asset classes. But it should be, because we now know that it will make you richer. So if other people weren't going to do it, we decided we would do it. We would research the property market and treat it like the most significant asset class in the wealth creation world. So let's have a look at how we did that. It turns out that property is driven by four key macro factors: economics and employment, population and demographics, infrastructure spending, and the balance between supply and demand. Economics and employment is essentially the amount of economic activity and job growth in an area. Population and demographics is about the population, its size and structure, and how it's growing. Infrastructure spending is about the level of public and private spending in an area on things like schools, hospitals and roads, airports. And obviously, supply and demand is about the amount of housing being built against the amount of people that are moving into an area or demanding that housing. And that applies to buying and renting. So this research essentially drives us to where we should be investing next. So now we're here. Now what? We're standing in the area that we should be investing. Should we buy any property? Well, obviously not. What's the value? What are the amenities? Who's going to rent it and for how much? What access to transport is there? What's the quality like? What about the design? There are so many significant factors to take into consideration. And all of this gives us the information to assess whether it's worthy of your investment. So how do we work that out? And how do we keep the emotion out of it? Because as we know, emotions can kill wealth. Well, you see, the researchers of the share markets have long delved into the worlds of ratings and rankings. You have the Morningstar, the Intelligent Investor, and pretty much any fund manager or investment bank has some sort of rating system of their own. But where are the property ones? Can't find them? That's because they don't exist. Or at least they are very few and far between. And the ones that are out there don't have much substance. Until, of course, ours. So what's ours about? Well, it's about cash flow and growth. Why cash flow and growth, you ask? Because they're the two key factors for property investors. Growth is the most important factor for any asset because it's the growth that makes us wealthy. But the cash flow is important because it helps us hold the asset long enough for it to grow. So here it is, the Blue Wealth Property Research Model. Well-traveled, simple, solid, and proven. Do not invest without it. So it turns out we all want to retire more comfortably. We want to have lots of money when we retire so we can travel, eat at fancy places, play golf, go shopping, take care of our kids, and of course our kids' kids. So how do we do that? Well, we go to work and we earn money, and typically 9.5% of what we earn gets paid automatically into our super. Now, most of us put it into the default fund chosen by our employer, and some of us will choose the fund ourselves. Most of our super is in some sort of balanced fund, and we expect that when we retire, that fund will have enough in it to allow us to do the things we want to do in retirement. All sounds pretty good? Well, actually, it's not. It turns out that 84% of all Australians will retire on less than $21,000 a year. That's right, $21,000 a year. Is that going to be you? Could you live on that? Do you think that you could achieve your retirement dreams on that kind of money? Yeah, that's what I thought. Only 4% of us will earn more than $41,000 in retirement. And even that doesn't sound like a very fancy retirement. So how did this happen? Well, it turns out that the traditional superannuation path that we're all on is the wrong one. It turns out that we don't start thinking about it early enough, we don't put enough money in, and most importantly, our super money doesn't work hard enough. Over the last 5 years, the typical balanced fund, where most of our super money goes, has grown on average by a measly 0.25% per annum, which means your money isn't working hard enough. So how do we fix it? How do we change things enough so that we can have more choices when we retire and we won't have to live on less than $21,000? Well, instinctively, most Australians turn to property when they think about retirement planning. The number one reason the majority of Australian investors buy a property is to fund their retirement. But what has that got to do with super, you ask? Well, it turns out that in 2007, some laws changed, allowing us to borrow money to invest in property inside our super. And the best part is that when we sell that property, it's tax-free in retirement. That's right, tax-free. And if we sell it before we retire, we pay much less tax on our profit. Can that be right? We buy a property as an investment and sell it when we retire and pay zero tax? That's right, that's exactly what we can do. So how do we do that? Well, it starts by setting up our own super fund, which turns out is relatively easy. That super fund is called a self-managed super fund, or an SMSF. We then put the super money we currently have plus future super contributions into our SMSF instead of the fund we're currently contributing to. The process is that simple, but there are lots of little details you need to know, which a good advisor can help you with. One important detail is about who's in your super fund. Your SMSF can have up to 4 members, so it can be you and your husband or wife, your parents, siblings, friends, or whoever you see fit. That's really helpful when you don't quite have enough super yourself. The structure is really important, so make sure you have the right people in your corner. The other really important factor is the property itself. There's no point setting up this great new structure only to find that the property you bought was a dud, or in the wrong market, or you bought it in the wrong part of the cycle. Setting up an SMSF and finding the right property to invest in will help you get on the right path to retiring richer. So get onto it today, because every day will make a big difference to your future. So most of us grew up hearing all about the great Australian dream. The dream of owning our own home on a quarter-acre block in the suburbs. We get told to study hard at school, get a good job, save our money, find a good boy or a good girl to marry, and buy a home to raise our kids. Some of us have decided that that's the way to go, while for many of us, it couldn't be further from the truth. Either way, many of us have decided that our great Australian dream is underpinned by purchasing a home. Most of us have a clear idea of where we want to live, and typically it's more expensive than we had hoped. Even the suburbs a little further out are more expensive than we thought. So we bite the bullet and buy something anyway. We've now spent too much and spend the next couple of decades on the back foot trying to stay ahead of the game. Let's take the example of John and Mary. They want to live in the inner city suburb of Heavensville. And in order to buy a house in that suburb, they need to pay at least $700,000. They decide to move to the inferior neighbouring suburb Hellsvale and find a property for $600,000. They use their savings of $90,000 as a deposit and pay the stamp duty and other costs. They take out a 25-year principal and interest loan of $540,000, and it costs them approximately $840 a week. Mary's sister Kate and her husband Peter decide there's a better way. They decide to rent in Heavensville for $550 a week and decide that they will buy a property as an investment somewhere else. They sit down and do their numbers and find out that they can comfortably afford to buy a $450,000 property as an investment. They borrow $405,000, and it turns out that the property costs them only $60 a week to hold. That's right, $60 a week. They're pleasantly surprised and realise that with their borrowing capacity and the minimal holding costs, they can buy 2 of these properties. They're now in a situation where they own $900,000 worth of investment assets, costing them $120 a week, and they're living in their preferred suburb for $550 a week. Their total cost is $670 a week. John and Mary, on the other hand, are living in a suburb they don't want to live in, have $600,000 worth of assets, and it's costing them $840 a week, which is $170 more than Kate and Peter. When both sets of assets double in the coming years, Kate and Peter will have $1.8 million worth of assets, while John and Mary will have $1.2 million worth of assets. So it turns out that in today's world, the great Australian dream may not be what it's cracked up to be. The world has changed and the way we use our money is changing with it. The great Australian dream has now become about lifestyle and smarter decision making. Clearly, Kate and Peter won that contest hands down. If you want to find out what your numbers might look like, contact us today. Your future may be brighter than you think.